You're back for more. It's great to see you. There's nothing that obligates you to watch these recorded lessons in any kind of order. But having spoken in the last video lesson, the first week of the module, about what business and about what management is, what we turn to in the second week is to say, well, where does management come from? And I have, as is my habit, a presentation to share with you, which I've put up on the screen now, and I'll just move into the corner over there, and let's consider or contemplate the evolution of what we know as management. There's a series of objectives, and I think I need to address why it's important to look at this, because if you can't answer this question, and if you decline to answer this question, you're not going to learn very much about the importance of the evolution of management thought. We are going to talk about theories, and we'll contemplate where that comes from. And the theories fall into classes. The scientific management era is the first time we looked at this in any kind of detail. And I'm going to draw a line over there and say that that is part one. And when we return in part two, it would be like going to another double lecture. And that's when we look at these other theories and try and pull everything together in what seems to have emerged in the last 20 years or so. So the first thing, it's important to know this simply because, remember we spoke about output and efficiency and effectiveness, and I said that in order to achieve those things, you had to manage. Well, it is the desire that we have to achieve efficiency and effectiveness, which has guided the evolution of management theory. In essence, what we have in our books is the consequence of what we're doing in our factories, and it'll become clearer as we move on. We also want you to understand job specialization and division of labor, and I've got a demonstration for you in this lesson, which is very illustrative. And you need to be able to identify principles of administration and principles of organization, because effective organizations, ones that work well, that perform well, happen to adhere to those principles of administration and organization. But that's not where it ends. You also have to see how over time there's been a change in thinking, because there has been. And if we trace that evolution, it's a very interesting one. You recall back in the first lesson, we spoke about the fact that our development as a species is something which tracks a kind of cultural evolution, and we form our culture as we go. Well, our culture was formed by two fairly massive wars, hence they were called Great Wars in the last century. And that is the impetus, if you like, for some of the management theory that we see having emerged in the 20th century, the 1900s. We also want you to think about management science, which is what I was studying when I got to university in the 1980s, and what management science was talking about when it was trying to make organizational resource utilization as efficient and as effective as possible. And finally, so that you can see the ecosystem of which every business is part is something which impacts on how we think about the best way to manage a business. So I can draw a picture of this for you. And there's a bit of a schematic over here. That schematic says that over these years, from the late 1800s to roughly where we are now, we see scientific management theory not giving way, but making way for administrative management theory. And neither of those gave way, but they didn't make way for human theories. And there's another human theory here, which we call management science. And over here we talk about organizational environment theory. Thinking that by 1945 or thereabouts that there was no more scientific management is in fact false. But by the time we got through to the end of the Second World War in 1945, we had come to realize that it wasn't just about science, it was about the science of administration, about getting that right, about organizing people. And we were doing a lot of that in the war, which is why it's a fairly fundamental one. So we're just going to track that particular illustration, okay? And I'll call it up again and again in this lesson, in both parts of the lesson, in fact, so that you are not going to flounder at all. So we had this bloke, Adam Smith, in the 1700s, 1770 or thereabouts, a philosopher and an early economist, as it turns out. And he was just puzzled at the way some firms were better than others. So he went and studied a pin making factory. And he found that pins are made with 18 separate tasks. I'll put them on a slide for you, so let me show them to you. Those are the 18 things you do to make a pin. You spank the wire. That's basically just soften it so that you can work it. And you clean it, and you draw it out or extrude it, and you straighten it. And 18 functions later, you've got yourself a pin. But if you think about it, one person making a pin is going to make very few pins. But you can, by order of significant magnitude, accelerate the number of pins that are made, or in other words, generate more output, more productivity, if people specialize in each of those activities. And specializing in activities allows us to harness the power of efficiency and the benefits of the economies of scale, although I'll come to that in a short bit. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the early 1900s, we had this bloke you see on the screen in front of you, Frederick Taylor, and he was an engineer. So he wrote this book in 1911, The Principles of Scientific Management. And 20 years ago or thereabouts, it was voted the most influential management book of the 20th century, probably by an American chapter of the Fellows of the Academy of Management. Nevertheless, this guy was someone who made a lot of money producing steel stuff, and he also told us how to make businesses work better. And his point was, if you work out what it is that people are doing, and you work out what it is that they actually know, then you can figure out how to improve what they're doing. So if someone keeps on walking around a machine in order to make the machine work, maybe you've got to change the controls so that the person doesn't walk around the machine. First of all, you lessen the risk of them getting hurt by moving parts of that machinery. And second of all, you make them walk less. That's science for you. You could also argue, we'll have to return to this, that it's a little bit inhuman to say that someone is not allowed to walk around because it wastes the company's time. But if you write down where they should walk and how they should walk and make it a rule, a procedure that they can't avoid, then if you multiply that by 100 people in a factory, you might be achieving some significant time saving. You also, Frederick Taylor pointed out to us, have to use the right sort of people who have the right qualities to do the work. Not just any old person, but the person who has the right qualities. And you finally have to determine a benchmark level of performance for getting the job done and develop a pay system, which says if you work better than accepted or better than standardized, we'll pay you more money. We call it a bonus. The 13th check is the words you might hear people use, right? Get paid 12 checks between January and December, 12 salary payments, and you might just pick up a 13th in your birthday month or perhaps in December. And that is compensation for you working really hard. It's not like there are no problems with this, because there's several problems. It's the case that if you're a manager and you're being paid according to how much you can increase productivity without increasing the amount of money you spend for it, you might just make people work harder for the same money. It's what scientific management did was make people work jolly hard. in horrendous conditions sometimes. And that's something which characterizes the notion of being scientific about managing any activity. Administrative management, on the other hand, is something which doesn't try to make people's lives better, but it tries to make the way they walk around their machines even more efficient. So it addresses organizational structure and relationships. It says, who's the boss? Who's the big guy here? And both Weber and Fail have parts to play. So Max Weber, a German, and he figured if you could get the processes right, then the business would work well. But it was essential to get the processes right so that people weren't falling over themselves. Bureaucracy is based on a general principle of precisely defined and organized across the board or comprehensive competencies of the various offices. The various offices sounds like marketing, operations, people, and money. And those are underpinned by rules, laws, or administrative regulations. We spoke about that in that first lesson, didn't we? We spoke about the fact that you needed laws and regulations in order to keep everyone on the straight and narrow, making the business work. Well, it's something which manifested in what Weber was writing 100 years ago. So, step one, you know that bureaucratic administration in the public sector is going to be a little bit distinctive from bureaucratic management of a private company in the private sector. Bureaucracy is given a bad name, a bad reputation, lousy cred. Why? Because we liken inefficient business departments in state-owned enterprises like Home Affairs or a state-run hospital, for example. We equate that with bad service, and we say that it's bureaucracy, and we call it bad. There's nothing wrong with bureaucracy. Bad bureaucracy is bad, but good bureaucracy is awesome. And no one says you need to step out of your way to try and find bad bureaucracy. Okay? So, division of labor is what works, and regulations work. Everyone needs to know what their job is, and once you know what your job is, then you need to do your job. Very simple, very straightforward. Make sure that people are qualified to do their job, and then you'll be sweet. Fail didn't really dispute this. Also an engineer, a Frenchman in this case, he wrote in 1916 the French version of general and industrial administration. And he said that there were 6 types of work. There was like technical work and commercial work, like looking and putting a contract together and signing a deal, and financial work like accounting, and security work, making sure that no one was stealing stuff, and accounting work, making a record of stuff, and then planning and leading and organizing and whatever. So if you look at those 6 activities, they practice in the 4 functions as we understand it. And he identified 5 primary functions in his original 1916 work. Planning, organizing, commanding, sounds like leading to me, and coordinating and controlling. Same as your course outline says. We're going to look at planning, leading, organizing, and controlling. So at this point in time, you either use the textbook or Google or a pause on this video to look at this particular page and this particular page, because you need to get this into your head, and I'm not going to dwell and read through it with you. So 3 pages, and I reckon you'll be okay. From there, I'm going to point out to you that it's time to call a halt to this. This is a 20-25 minutes of recording, and I think that's enough. So I'll see you in the next one.